Just as a way of giving a little bit of disclaimer on this particular presentation, a good way to start a presentation, by the way, this presentation focuses on one aspect of measurement, and that is the behavioral aspect. What kind of behavior is motivated by the kinds of measures that you have in place? Now, I'm going to use a very specific example to point out the behavioral aspects, and it may be an example not all of you can relate to. But trust me, by the end of the presentation, you'll be able to reflect back and see what I was trying to accomplish and hopefully did accomplish and may influence the way that you approach measurement in the future. Whenever we give a presentation that uses any of the Software Engineering Institute's terminology, we have to pay homage to that particular group, so we have done that. As I indicated in the intro, I am a lead appraiser and I do lead a lot of appraisals. And whenever we conduct a CMMI appraisal, we have a team that we work with, and we typically divide the 6 or 8 person team into a series of mini teams. And each mini team is responsible for a subset of the process areas in the model that we're going to be appraising. The mini team's responsibilities include a number of things, but primarily they're responsible for all the data gathering and analysis that has to be conducted throughout the 8 or 10-day appraisal. That'll be reviewing documentation, it'll be conducting and participating actively in the interviews, and it'll be consolidating the data that they get from those sources. One of the primary functions that they have toward the end of an appraisal is to determine for each project that we've evaluated, were the practices within their area of responsibility fully implemented, largely implemented, partially implemented, or not implemented. So those are the 4 decisions that they're making for each practice as implemented or not on each project. Toward the end of the appraisal, too, we will be rolling up the collective projects, which some will be fully, largely, partially, or not implemented, and rolling those up so that we can make a statement about the organization's implementation of that particular practice. When we get to that point, we look to the mini team to make the initial proposal. Does it roll up to fully implemented? Does it roll up to largely implemented, etc.? In order to conduct the appraisal, I've picked a maturity level 3 for an example here, and I've shown it as a 2-week appraisal process, but the point that I want to focus on is the 2nd day of week 2. And this is where we're doing that roll-up that I just talked about. Let's say we evaluated 5 projects, we looked at each practice on each of those 5 projects, and now it's time to do the consolidation across those 5 projects and determine what it means at the organizational level. So I have some ground rules for this particular day of the appraisal process. All I want to know is for each practice, I want the mini team to make 1 of 2 proposals. We're either going to present a weakness in the preliminary findings, or we're not going to present a weakness in the preliminary findings. That's the basic question being posed to the mini team responsible for this series of practices. The full team is then going to evaluate what the mini team has proposed. Either we're going to present a weakness or not, and they're going to either agree with it or they're not going to agree with it, and then the appropriate discussion will ensue. So trying to get that from a weakness presented in preliminary findings or not into the practice characterization, if we have enough evidence and the mini team is saying we're not going to present a weakness, then essentially what we're saying is that that practice at the organizational level is fully implemented. There's nothing to feed back to the organization to say, here's an improvement opportunity, something that we think you could do better. On the other hand, if we are going to present a weakness, then we're going to be asking the organization for feedback. Did we get this right? Do you believe that this is a weakness in your implementation? Or do we not understand the current situation? There's more information that you can provide to help us understand it better. In that case, we're not going to try and distinguish whether it's largely implemented or partially implemented or not implemented. We're just going to leave it blank for now. We're going to wait till we have all the information before we get into the longer discussion, which is what's the correct characterization for that particular practice. So here we are, we're in the morning on the day when we're doing all this consolidation and trying to figure out the practices and what we're going to present in preliminary findings. I turn to the group that's responsible for requirements management and say, go, take it away. So the mini team leads the discussion, and they discuss all the glorious strengths and all the excruciating detail about what they saw with respect to practice 1 in project A and practice 1 in project B. And they're going on, and they're talking about all that wonderful stuff. And they also point out if there were any weaknesses that they identified, they point those out as well. So the discussion goes on for a while, but eventually they get around to proposing whether the practice is fully implemented, that is, there were no weaknesses, we're not going to present a preliminary finding, or there was a weakness that warrants being presented in preliminary findings, in which case we're not going to characterize the practice at this time. So that proposal eventually gets made. Other team members do the gut check. They determine whether or not they believe what they've heard, and they vote on the mini team's proposal. They either agree with it or we have some discussion. Throughout this period, we have those typical distractions you have in any meeting. You have the cell phone calls. You have the knocks on the door. You have the people saying, hey, I need a coffee break. And after all of the discussion and all of the distractions, eventually we get finished with requirements management. Unbeknownst to the team, I wear a sports watch, and the sports watch has a timer on it. Unbeknownst to them, I started the timer when we initially started discussing requirements management, and as we conclude the final practice, I click it off. That tells me how long it took to get through requirements management. And I pop that into this handy-dandy spreadsheet, which, if you look at the first line, it says requirements management has a total of 17 practices, which is 5% of all that we need to cover today. We started requirements management at 8:21 in the morning. We finished at 9:06, meaning that we invested 45 minutes in discussing those 17 practices. The total expended to date for the whole day is 45 minutes, and we average 2 minutes and 39 seconds per practice. Now, if we multiply that times the grand total number of practices down in the lower left-hand corner of the slide, 356 practices that we have to cover in total, at 2 minutes and 39 seconds per practice, that's going to take us until just after midnight to finish up. Now, the team looks at that and says just after midnight, they're not really convinced that that's what they want to be doing. I mean, the thought of we've only covered 17 practices, we still have 339 more to go, that sinks in pretty quickly, and the team gets very, very focused on getting on with the business of getting through these practices. Somebody asked, hey, why is 906 pre-filled in the project planning line even though we really haven't started it yet? And the answer to that question is the spreadsheet assumes as soon as you finish the first process area, you immediately start on the second one. So, of course, everybody says, look, we don't want to be here till midnight. We want to get the heck out of here. Let's get on to project planning. So some 40 minutes later, we finish up with project planning, and of course I put that number in the spreadsheet as well. And if you look at the PACE columns, not the yellow one on the right, but the next two columns, essentially what those are saying is within the process area itself, PA means process area, within the process area of project planning, we spent 1 minute and 35 seconds per practice. So that's an improvement over the 2 minutes and 39 seconds per practice that we spent in requirements management. So we've accelerated the pace. The next column over, which says accumulated, means that on average, between requirements management and project planning, we've brought the average time per practice down to 2 minutes per practice. At 2 minutes per practice, given the remaining practices, we're now going to be here doing this until 8:13 in the evening. A significant improvement, by the way, over just after midnight. So you'll notice, if you're watching this as an objective observer, watching this process unfold, you'll see some changes in team behavior. You'll see a whole lot less discussion